wanted to take some time before we really got into today's discussion to orient everybody to what our intent was with the data management and sharing plan, or the data management sharing policy. And I think that impetus will help you all understand really what will make a good plan. So with that, I'm going to share my slides and dive in. I'm not going to spend too much time on all of the impetus other than just to remind everyone how we got here about one, the cultural expectations around data sharing. Our public expects NIH as the steward of the nation's $40-some billion investment in research to really make the most of this data. And this has been a signature initiative of the current president and of NIH for some time. Why does the nation find data sharing important? Well, one, it helps increase trust. This is an interesting survey from Pew Research, which I hope you all have seen before, that people tend to find science more trustworthy when data is openly available to the public. Interestingly, it doesn't matter if it's funded by the federal government or not. There's some thoughts about industry, but really the openness of the data for it to be observed and perturbed for further analyses was really important. And of course, NIH finds that data sharing really advances our mission. We've talked about this a lot during the policy development, but in general, it helps advance our science. It maximizes our trust with our community and also really leverages the participants' investment in the data they share. So again, this is all of the impetus behind this. We've had this conversation many times, and I don't want to spend too much time here. The other component I wanted to remind the group here is because these are such important tenets to NIH, we've been doing data sharing for a long time. While the policy seems new to some, for most of our constituencies, there has been some form of data sharing policy in place for a period of time. Our goal really here is to make this now the culture of NIH and shift the culture to data sharing as part of the research enterprise instead of a secondary thought. Well, so today we're talking about what makes a good plan, but I wanted to remind you that the plan is part of the policy requirement. The new policy for data management and sharing, which will go into effect in 2023 on January 25th, has two basic requirements. Submit a plan for all of your NIH funded research generating scientific data, and then follow up on your plan. It's pretty basic in terms of the requirements. Of course, the devil's in the details, and we've had other kind of conversations around that. But I wanted to remind you the core of the policy is submitting a plan, which brings us all together today saying what is a good plan and how do we meet that objective? So as mentioned, our goals of the plan is really to make sharing as the default practice. We really want data sharing to be maximized to the extent possible. I know that stresses people out a lot about how do you make it maximally available, and that's why it's a plan. And we ask the investigators who work with the data to really tell us what they think is the best invent or the best strategy. There are limits for technical, ethical, and legal factors that we can talk about more, but just because it's the default doesn't mean there may not be room for exceptions or justifiable reasons to limit sharing. Importantly, as part of our plans, we really want data sharing to be responsibly implemented. We want to make sure that the privacy rights and confidentiality of participants are described so that we can continually maintain that public trust. The real signature thing I think about the plan for the policy is that it requires the plan to be submitted at the application stage, which means everyone prospectively plans for data sharing. And I think this is the real hallmark of the policy because you anticipate how the data will be shared, which means you can build it into consent and conversation about how the data will be shared, or you can figure out what repositories you might want to be sharing your data and how much that might cost so that you can ask NIH for that money. Thinking about this in advance instead of as an afterthought is really the critical component of making it integral to the research process. So from policy to implementation, which is where we are getting close to that 2023 deadline. And we have been working across NIH and with all of you to really figure out what is needed to make this a really effective policy. So what's a good plan? Focus of today. We have released some information about our recommended elements of a plan. And hopefully this isn't surprising to too many people. And I'm excited to hear the winners of the challenge talk about how they implemented this here. But of course, we want to hear more about the data type. What is going to be preserved and what's going to be shared. Again, all data should be managed. Not all data need to be shared, and that can be differentiated in the plan. We want to know about the tools, software, and code. And standards. We heard Nina talk about the importance of metadata to be able to find the data. The goal of this policy isn't a checkbox that we share data. The goal is to make the usable, findable, accessible, reusable, and actually game-changing for science and the public. So it's important that we're curating the day and ways that it can be used again. We, of course, want to hear more about data preservation, the access and the timelines, where you're going to put the data and how long it will be available. What are the reuse considerations and how will data be accessed? And of course, what does the governance look like here? How will the plan compliance be monitored? So again, we can talk more about this in the discussion, but that is the recommended elements that NIH has put out. We've also put out some other resources to help incentivize good plan development. Of course, good plans cost money, and we know that. So we've been talking about how you can ask NIH to help you responsibly implement your data management and sharing plan. We've also put out some guidance about where should the data go. Again, an important component of the plan is telling us where you plan to put the data, who's going to manage it. Does it have the appropriate security standards and privacy standards? So we've put out some guidance to help investigators appropriate data repositories accordingly. We also today put out some new resources, and our goal here really is to every time we put out a request for information on a resource you've asked us for, to give you a resource that you've asked for that you've already provided information so you can see the fruits of your labor. So today we put out a consent language. Am I getting close, Nina? I'm just about done. So we put out some consent resources to help people build this into the consent process and points to consider in practicing de-identification practices. So that is something we can talk about as well. So preparing for 2023, here are some things that we can talk about. Try drafting a data management sharing plan as our DataWorks collaborators have done. Identify the existing resources. You now know what a data librarian is. And look at your past data sharing practices or some practice exercises.